Hi, everyone. My name is Joanne Davis, and I would like to thank you so much for joining us tonight for this wonderful hope-filled program. I feel so fortunate to be an active participant and supporter of Partners in Torah Cleveland, and also to serve on the new leadership board for Israel Bonds Cleveland. These two incredible organizations stand for everything I value as a young Jewish professional living in Cleveland, and they hold a special place in my heart. As Partners in Torah embarks on its annual campaign, Israel Bonds Cleveland invites you to take advantage of an opportunity to support both of these special organizations. You can now purchase an Israel bond and donate it directly to Partners in Torah Cleveland. With one donation, you can ensure the continuity of meaningful, engaging, Torah-centered Jewish learning in Cleveland, and also secure our Jewish future by supporting the State of Israel. To purchase an Israel bond benefiting Partners in Torah Cleveland, simply send an email to cleveland@israelbonds.com or contact the office directly at 216-454-0180. Thank you for joining me in this double mitzvah and enjoy this evening's program.
February, the ambassador was interviewed on Dean's Speaker Series with Dean Cohen, where he gave his thoughts on a variety of issues concerning the recent Abraham Accords and what they mean for future peace in the Middle East. He was asked to share his thoughts on what had changed in the region to allow for such monumental and previously unimaginable policy changes. Here's what the ambassador had to say.
What were the conditions that allowed this to happen? How did the landscape change over the last 10, 15, 20 years that allowed, one of the countries in the Gulf that was one of the members that boycotted Egypt when they normalized with Israel, to then come full circle and to normalize with Israel, many years later. If Eric, you and I were talking 5 years ago, and we thought, or we discussed the idea of a Pope visiting Abu Dhabi, or anywhere in the Gulf for that matter, and hosting a mass for 180,000 people, we would have probably concluded that that was crazy. It was unlikely to happen. 5 years ago, just 5 years ago. But here we are, welcoming a Pope's visit, building an Abrahamic house. Here is a conservative Gulf country putting money into a public synagogue right next to a church and right next to a mosque. So I'm taking the long way to try to describe some of the social and the economic and the political shifts that are taking place in our region. The Abraham Accords is one reflection of those changes and those shifts. We can analyze it from a policy level. We can analyze it from a human interaction level. But I think we have recognized and we've concluded that if you take all the geopolitics away, it is still in UAE's best interest to normalize with Israel. You have two very dynamic economies, two very forward-looking countries, visionary leadership. There is no reason we shouldn't be talking to each other and doing business and trading and investing and researching together.
The value system you've described of tolerance and inclusion is truly commendable and inspiring. What are your thoughts on the likelihood of the more extremist countries in the region adopting this mentality? And if they don't, how will that impact these alliances? First, the ambassador, and then Mr. Hoenlein.
It's hard to speak on behalf of what other countries shouldn't do, will or will not do. All I know is that if we espouse these values, we should not be shy about promoting them. If we believe in these values and that represents who we are, we should be very vocal about them. And I think we're doing that. I think we are setting that example, from inviting the Pope and building an Abrahamic house to fostering better understanding with everyone around us, not just our friends in Israel, but everywhere. And I think we've done that. We've done that publicly. We've done that privately. We stand up for what we believe. We've never been shy about expressing those views and those values. And if a country or a society or a town wants to follow that or emulate that, that's ultimately up to them. But all we can do is try to set that example because we believe in it.
And Mr. Hoenlein, what are your thoughts on this? You've mentioned before how you've been directly involved with some of these countries that are more on the extreme side, Iran, Egypt. What, from your perspective, what's the likelihood of these countries to follow the lead of the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, these other countries that have led the way in this regard?
So I think that there are great opportunities. There are other countries, and mostly I think there are opportunities with the people, even if their leadership has their own agendas, the kleptocracies they want to protect, the extremist agendas that they want to promote. And we know that there are leaders today in the region. Iran obviously is one, Turkey others that have been promoting more extremist interpretations. But we know amongst the people, for instance, trade with Turkey during all of these difficult years has never gone down. It's constantly gone up, trade with Israel. If you see the relationships in other regards, that the people there are different than where the leadership may be. So that is a very hopeful sign. And they see the example that the UAE and others have set that they will emulate. And it strengthens countries like Jordan and Egypt that were in the first to sign peace deals, and others that will now come into it. I can tell you how many countries have approached us about joining a Mediterranean initiative to be linked in to the commonality, the common ties, the common effort, and to withstand against those extremist ideologies which threaten all of them. It's not just Israel, it's not just particular leaders, it's the whole region gets threatened by these. So the more we can show the common interests that they have and what they can benefit, and when people are hungry, they're rife to be attracted by the extremists, by the ideologists. And so as we help build economies, you fight against terrorism as well. And European countries see that also. You have energy, you have so many other things that are developing, which can be incentives to countries to want to join together. So I am optimistic that we will see this process move. I hope the administration, I believe they're committed to it. They've said it. I hope they will act on it. And we have to send signals also that we, America, are committed to maintaining a strong presence in the region, that we will back them as we shift the focus to the Indo-Pacific. We cannot ignore the Middle East because the bad guys take advantage of it and exploit that. If they feel there's a vacuum, others will fill it.
Yeah, and it's, as both of you have explained, the threat is not only radical Islam to Israel, radical Islam to the West. It's probably much more serious to the Middle East, to the countries themselves. I mean, we think about different conflicts, Lebanon, Jordan, different countries where they've had internal civil wars over these issues. So it means so much for all of us on so many different levels. One of the key negotiating factors that sealed the deal with the Abraham Accords was the issue of Israel annexing disputed land settlements. Israel agreed to halt annexation in pursuit of a possible two-state solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Here's the ambassador again.
Doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything. There's no two countries who agree on everything. We're going to have a very dynamic, very strong economic and investment relationship, and we're going to have tough conversations on Palestine. I mean, both can happen at the same time. And I think that's what we realized a few years ago, and we decided we want to take this step. And I think the annexation debate that occurred this summer is why it happened at the time it happened and the way it happened. But minus annexation, I think it's fair to say that this was probably on the trajectory. Couldn't tell you if it was going to happen a year from now or 5 years from now. But I think the annexation debate is what gave us the detour to make it happen now. And now, as you see, there's enthusiasm from both sides. The Arab Peace Initiative approach, which was, all right, we're all going to hold together. No one's going to do anything until there's a full solution based on 1967 lines, and then all Arab countries will normalize as a bloc. I think we tried that for 18 years. It didn't work. So we're now trying something different. It's now the approach of each country goes along its own path. And I think maybe in our case, we got some concessions that were very important for the Palestinians, the suspending annexation, which salvaged the two-state solution. But if other countries want to do that or choose not to do that, that's up to them. I mean, at the end of the day, what they choose, how they structure their deal between the Israelis and the Americans, that's ultimately up to them. But I think it's still important to address the Palestinian issue. And whether we do it through a collective front or whether we do it privately, I think it's too early to tell. But I was recently on a panel at the Washington Institute earlier this week, and we were talking exactly about this question. I think the conclusion of the panel is, if you want to address the idea of peace politically, kind of as a final solution, chances are we're probably not going to succeed. But if we try to make progress on quality of life issues, on movement, on broadband, on things that improve the everyday Palestinian access to resources, to jobs, to technology, if there is a plan that is spearheaded by the United States, including others, I think a lot of countries would be willing to participate in just taking incremental steps, hitting singles and doubles of trying to improve people's life on a daily basis by providing resources and jobs and so on. I think that is a more realistic approach than saying, let's have a big conference, let's talk about the two-state solution, let's try to find, let's bring Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas and try to fix this. I'm not hopeful that solution will work.
The UAE is arguably the wealthiest country in the world. The decision to embrace and possibly invest in Israeli innovation and technology is indicative of a culture that places a premium on a robust economy and being state-of-the-art. If you look at the conditions in Gaza, it's clear that not all government leaders in the region share these values. What are your thoughts on this?
We heard during this year of COVID a lot of theories and conspiracies promulgated on the internet and elsewhere. But one of them was a real blood libel against the state of Israel, that Israel didn't provide vaccines to the Palestinian people. It's not Israel's responsibility. In fact, the Oslo Accords stipulate that health matters rest with the PA and now in Gaza with Hamas. Despite that, Israel did offer to help, and their efforts were rejected. Although they did inoculate 100,000 people come into Israel to work and have supplied tens of thousands of vaccines to the PA. But the responsibility rests with the Palestinian Authority that uses its money for pay to slay to reward terrorists and murderers rather than to provide for the health and well-being of their people. And I know I've heard from many Arab leaders who's discussed that the billions and billions of dollars that were poured into these areas and ended up in the pockets of leaders, they call it a kleptocracy, where they and their children benefit and the people suffer. So you're absolutely right. The people, I think, are prepared and would. And I believe ultimately the Palestinians and Israelis will be great partners. They have heavy commitment to education, to other things. There are divisions between the Palestinians, the West Bank versus Gaza, et cetera. And even before the state of Israel, they didn't intermarry. There were divisions. It's a very tribal society. But I believe the fundamentals that people want their kids to have a better life. People don't want to see their children, killed or victims of terror or hate. So there has to be fundamental commitments that the leaders have to become responsible to the people. In Iran, for instance, there were 6,000 demonstrations last year by the people, college students, truck drivers, others. Unfortunately, there's no resonance in the West to stand up with them and to stand against the forces of extremism that rob the people of their opportunities and benefits. But ultimately, if people see it and they get a little encouragement and a little support from outside, if the PA finally gets the message that they are losing aid, they don't care. Hundreds of millions of dollars from Europe, United States, and elsewhere, Israel cut off because they continue to reward terrorists and murderers by providing for them and their families and the pay to slay that the Taylor Force Act was enacted to counter. So the basic point is that everybody wants to see improvement in the quality of life. As long as people in Gaza live in terrible conditions, they will be susceptible to the appeals and to the diversions of the leadership to take them to riot and demonstrate when they know they're just making them cannon fodder and putting civilians in harm's way. And I think that the role of the West, and especially in the United States in particular, is to help those forces to make clear, to draw red lines, and to say we're going to stand by our allies, not have questionable relationships. We should push for human rights. We should do all the other things principles that we stand for. But there has to be a clear message that these are our allies. I'm pleased that the United States is going ahead with the sale of the F-35s to the UAE. That's an important message, that we are there for them. But when they do the right thing, and if they do the wrong thing, we say so. But the fundamentals of the relationship are so important. And the message, because in the Middle East in particular, perception is more important than reality. It's how people perceive situations. And if they can see the benefits and they see the light at the end of the tunnel, they will pursue it.
And Ambassador, what are your thoughts on this? That we see Gaza, one of the poorest areas in the world, all the millions of dollars that have gone to the PA do not make it to the people. It stays with the leadership. How are we to get that message to the people and give them the opportunities when their leadership clearly, at least at this point in time, seems to be a roadblock?
So again, I go back to my previous answer, which is we just have to set the right example. We have to show that there are countries who do put the well-being of their citizens. One of the biggest lessons we've learned from the COVID pandemic is how fragile and how interdependent our economies are in the region. And so right now, starting from 2021 and for the foreseeable future, one of the central tenets of our foreign policy is to build up our economy and our GDP, is to strengthen it and develop it and make it strong enough that it's much stronger and can withstand any future shock, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's an oil price crunch or whatever it is. We realize that we need to be in much, much stronger economic shape. So we are focused on business, we are focused on investments, we are focused on trade. We are trying to make our economy even stronger than it was pre-pandemic. And only by setting these types of examples can people look up and say, hey, this is what we should strive for as well. There's an interesting poll that comes out every year. I think Malcolm's familiar with it. It surveys youth in the Arab world. It asks questions to just young Arabs. And every single year, well, for the last 11 years in a row, they ask one question every year. What country would you like to live in? And for 10 years in a row, young Arabs choose the UAE for the reasons that I've just outlined. There is rule of law, it's stable, it's tolerant. People actually believe that they have a chance at succeeding when they come to the UAE, very similar to the way people come to the US because it's the land of opportunity. People in the Middle East, at least young people in the Middle East, feel that the UAE is the place where they can make their dreams come true. And that is dealt with because there's a vision, because there's a leadership that tries to achieve that vision, and that people feel that this is the best chance where they can make a successful life or career. That's I think, the value-added piece of what the UAE brings to the table.
With the recent U.S. presidential election bringing a change in administration, the question on everyone's mind is what impact this will have on the future of the Abraham Accords, as well as policy changes with Iran. The ambassador shares his thoughts here.
I spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks talking to senior officials from the Biden administration, from Secretary Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Rob Malley, Brett McGurk, people that we've worked with in the past. And the one thing I've seen so far is they have learned the lessons of what did not work the previous time, that they are much more sober and conscious of the realities of what transpired throughout the last 4 years, but also what kind of position America's in today. America is in a much stronger position today. Whether you agree with how we got there or disagree with how we got there, maximum pressure has put the US in a stronger position, has put Iran in a weaker position. Low oil prices has contributed to that. COVID numbers in Iran have contributed to that. So the fact is, you are in a much stronger position today to negotiate either a JCPOA 2.0 or JCPOA with a follow-on. And I think there's a clear understanding of that. There's also a clear understanding that last time we were not consulted. It was done behind our back, and that's really what broke the trust, and that's what harmed the relationship. They're very aware of that. They're making sure that they're reaching out repeatedly to make sure that mistake doesn't happen again. At the end of the day, I think there is a way forward. I think there is room for a deal, but we want a deal that is stronger, that is longer, and it addresses our issues with Iran's behavior. Issues like missiles, like proxies, like interference. These were never addressed. These are as dangerous to our part of the world as the nuclear file. And I think the Biden team does understand that. So I think we're positioned to get a better deal if that's the intent. Let's see if that's what we're able to achieve. The point that we make to the Biden administration is we have a nuclear program, and many people have coined the gold standard. And it has been coined the gold standard because we don't have an enrichment or reprocessing program. And that makes it very safe and it makes it very clean. Why are your friends being held to a gold standard when your adversaries, the one who scream death to America every day, are held to a much lower standard? So I pose that question to which I don't get an answer.
There's overwhelming evidence that Iran was not compliant in the past, even without sanctions. What will change in the future?
Look, we all recognize that the number one challenge in the region right now is Iran. Iran's nuclear aspirations, its conventional weapons aspirations, its aggressive actions against other countries in the region, its global perspective, its desire to impose its will and its ideological extremist approach on not only in the Middle East but globally, and the need for the West to stand up, in particular the United States. We see that maximum pressure did have an impact. The sanctions did have an effect. And although the Iranian regime takes 40% of the economy and cares little about the people, and we saw it with the COVID tragedy in the country where the huge numbers of people have died, and I think a very small percentage have actually been inoculated. The willingness to send their people into harm's way and to not to respond to the needs of the people with the massive drought, the economic conditions, the domestic problems, their currency is a fraction of what it was before. And yet they continue to support Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and all other terrorist operations there in South America and elsewhere. So there has to be a collective approach. It's not to punish the people. That was never the intent. And medicines and other things, as are muted on the internet, are not affected. It is meant to bring the message clearly that you cannot be an outlaw state, as Iran is, threatening its neighbors, undermining stability in the region and elsewhere, and exporting its hateful ideology and not be held to account. I believe that you can make a change. I believe the people of Iran will bring about the change. We have to be there to support them and to send a message that we will be there. We will stand with them. We will act with them. And we will help them bring about a democracy that they have known in the past, and to see to it that, regime change is not something imposed from the outside, but should come from the inside.
Here's the ambassador again, sharing his thoughts on the common threat of Iran and COVID-19 pandemic, as well as common opportunities.
And so those conversations, kept going. But yes, I think one of the things that brought us closer was a common perception of the Iran threat. But that is also coupled with, hey, these guys are really strong in technology and innovation. These guys are really strong on research. They're really strong in desalination. There's another series of reasons and points where we should be talking to them because it's in our national interest as well. And I think finally the convergence of both the common threats but the common opportunities got to a point where it just made sense to do this because it's in both countries' national interest. My favorite part of the Abraham Accords, my absolute favorite part, is that no one really had to lose anything. No one conceded anything. This was a win for the United States. It was a win for UAE, and it's a win for Israel. Everyone benefited. That's why it was so widely received and widely hailed. So I think this is what diplomacy is all about, is finding the formula where everyone benefits from a deal ultimately. I think we've made a very conscious decision in the UAE that once Corona pandemic, once we realized the impact of the pandemic, we were going to depoliticize it. We sent Corona assistance initially to Israel and to Iran, to Syria and to the US. This is about humanity. This is about safety. This is about us getting back to a normal lifestyle. So I think Abraham Accords are not, the things like pandemics, climate change, these large issues that are only going to get resolved with global collective efforts need to be depoliticized and just seen for what they are, objective challenges that everyone needs to line up behind to fix. So I strongly believe that things like this, we in Israel and anybody else who wants to participate should participate, because this doesn't get resolved until all the countries have addressed COVID.
2020 had its ups and its downs, and it's easy for us to have faith when things are going right, but a lot harder with uncertainty and hardship. There are so many similarities between Judaism and Islam. It would be interesting to hear both of your thoughts on the past year from a religious perspective. First the ambassador, and then Mr. Hoenlein.
I think from a religious perspective, it makes us realize, or at least makes us consider, that we're all in this together. Whether you're a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, or an atheist, at the end of the day, we all live on this earth together. We all have to coexist and live together. And whether it's a pandemic or climate change or anything else that spans the entire globe, we don't work on it together. If you shut down COVID in Israel and the UAE tomorrow, but it's still rampant in 3 or 4 other countries, you haven't really addressed or solved the problem. In fact, you've actually made the problem worse because you still are susceptible to that coming into your country. So I think it makes us realize that we're all human beings, that we're all in this together, and that we all have to work together to solve these problems. Otherwise, these problems doesn't get solved. I know it sounds a bit philosophical, but at the end of the day, regardless of what one's political affiliation or religious affiliation, if we do not put our hands together in order to deal with pandemics and climate changes and other global issues, we're not going to solve them. So I hope it makes people think about these issues with less of a political lens and more of a human lens.
Mr. Hoenlein, what are your thoughts from a religious perspective?
Well, first of all, I agree completely with the ambassador. I think the COVID doesn't have a target on its impact on any single group, geographically, ideologically, religiously, or any other way. And I think as we reflect on all the losses that each of us, our communities, our countries have suffered, the people that we have lost, the leaders that have did not survive, the damage that this COVID did economically and socially, that we need a common effort. And to meet the challenges, the global challenges, the broader challenges, that it requires all of us. We live in an interconnected world. There are no more divisions. Oceans don't protect us anymore. Mountain ranges don't protect us. America has 2 big oceans on either side, but we see that we can be penetrated, whether it's a virus of the kind that we saw with COVID, or whether it's a virus of hate, when we see anti-Semitism from the extreme left, extreme right, when we see the other challenges that come. We have a global economy. We have we have developed so many interrelationships that we have to focus on what we have in common. And the more people do that, the more they will see that we respect our differences. We're not dismissing them. We're not saying we believe in God. We may call it different things, but we believe in God and we believe in the principles. They are common. And the fundamentals are ones that we all share. And if we teach young people that, and we show them that the whole is far greater than the sum of the parts, that what divides us pales in comparison to what we have in common, what unites us. And then you can overcome, you can bridge any of the differences, not dismiss them, but recognize them, but more importantly, build on what we have in common. If we all care about our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, to see to it that they have a better life, that we look to the future based upon our experiences of the past. We look to our roots for guidance, for spiritual guidance, for practical guidance, so that we can help meet those challenges together. When one part of us fails, all of us are impacted.
And as the rabbi in the room, I figure I should throw in my 2 cents for what it's worth. I'm reminded of an amazing story of Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who was the head of the Mir Yeshiva, which is the largest rabbinical institution in the world. It's taken over almost half of Jerusalem at this point, I think. So he once had a meeting with a number of American leaders. Amongst those leaders was Howard Schultz, the CEO or past CEO, the founder of Starbucks Coffee. And the question was asked, why did the Holocaust happen? That's the question that Rabbi Finkel asked these business leaders, and none of them could give any type of a serious or satisfactory answer. What Rabbi Finkel answered was, during the Holocaust, 10 inmates in the concentration camps were given 1 blanket, and everyone had to make the decision every night, were they going to pass the blanket or pull the blanket? That was the lesson of the Holocaust. And I think on a much smaller level in a certain sense, but a much larger level in the fact that it affected the whole entire world, I think that's one of the lessons of COVID, is we had to look at ourselves and see, are we going to be mirror people or window people? Are we going to be people who are always looking in the mirror thinking, what's in it for me? how does this affect me, me? Or are we going to look out the window to the next guy, to our neighbor, to the person down the street and see what we can do to help? What does tragedy do? So the great people, they get up and they look out the window. The self-centered people, they look in the mirror. And I think that definitely from the leadership in this room, from the UAE in general, we've seen a lot of that amazing leadership of looking out the window, how we're at the top, we've done amazing things. Now let's see how we can help others in our region, in the world, and especially in this time of tremendous tragedy, of tremendous uncertainty, that's what true leadership is. And that's the lesson that I take from it, is in these times, uncertain times, times of tragedy, times of difficulty, that's when the care for another and the true leadership of care can really show forward. So it's clear from tonight's program that we have a lot of exciting developments to look forward to in the future. Here is the ambassador's thoughts on military collaboration and space exploration, and what a healthy relationship between Israel and the United Emirates looks like.
I think the potential is great. We haven't really had our ministries of defense and our militaries engage intensively yet. I think it's partly because of the political situation in Israel. But I think we've already seen UAE Air Force and the Israeli Air Force participate in training exercises in the US together, for example, and in some European countries. So I think we're starting from a good place. I think it has a lot of potential, not just on the military, but also on the research and development aspects of military and armaments. So I think I'm very hopeful. I don't think we've managed to really kickstart that process yet, but that's largely because of the politics in Israel. And I think the prime minister actually tweeted something after the Abraham Accords saying maybe we should send 2 astronauts to space together. Again, this is one of those things that need not be political. This is about the future. This is about science. This is about going to the next frontier. We should be doing it with as many partners as we possibly can. I think the most important part of the Abraham Accords is basically the potential for increased understanding. I know we're here at SAIS and we're talking about diplomacy and geopolitics, and that's important. But at the end of the day, Emiratis need to understand, appreciate, and respect Israelis, and Israelis need to understand, appreciate, and respect Emiratis. For that, they need to get to know us. We need to get to know them. As one of our prominent businessmen said, no, we can always do business. I need you to come meet my mother. If you really want to get to know me, you need to come to my mother's house. We need to have lunch or dinner. We need to kind of understand where we're coming from, our values, our culture, our history, who we are as a people. If you build that, you will have not just a warm peace, you will have a very productive, healthy, vibrant relationship. Me, that's the foundation of the Abraham Accords. And I'll finish off with this story because it's funny and it touches on your first question, which is how the region has shifted. So yesterday I met with my new Israeli counterpart, Ambassador Erdan, who just arrived, who's covering both Washington and New York. God bless him. It's not an easy task. But just to demonstrate how much the region has changed, first that meeting was, he was tweeting and took pictures, and now it's public, where me and Jeremy's meetings used to be private and snuck away in little corners. And I offered to host a dinner for him, a welcome to DC dinner. The only reason I can't do it now, obviously, is because of COVID. But just think about that for a second. The UAE ambassador to Washington is thinking about hosting a welcome to DC dinner for the Israeli ambassador. We'll figure out when we can do it. But just think about that. Think about that's where we are in 2021.
What can we as individuals and as a community do to foster a strong relationship with the countries that have become peace partners by signing the Abraham Accords?
I think the most important thing is education, that we try to educate our youth, our college students, and our populaces to be open, to see the opportunities, the possibilities, but to see the commonalities with people who are very distant and have often been maligned in our media and in all sorts of, in entertainment and all the different fora that we see where hate finds a home. So I think it's very important that we engage in education, that we do outreach, we find joint projects, not just of an economic nature, but taking students, having them study in each other's countries so that they get to know each other and they live with each other. I think that helps build bridges that are really remarkable. I know Morocco, it's being done. I know now there's a program even with the UAE that seems to be developing. but the openness of bringing conventions and conferences to each other's countries to expose the people and their media to be used not to spread messages of hate, but to help spread messages of conciliation and information and education. I think it's building for the next generation is the most critical challenge right now, to help them build stronger ties, more understanding, more knowledge, so that we can expand not only on the Abrahamic Accords, but on the activities and the possibilities, the potentialities for the whole world to benefit from it.
Beautiful. And Ambassador, what are your thoughts on what we as individuals here in America can do to help foster the Abraham Accords and help them to continue?
So I agree completely with Malcolm. I'll just go add one more step and say, just try to keep an open mind. We tend to be sometimes very judgmental about issues we have very strong feelings about, which is totally understandable. But just try to suspend judgment and try to get to know the other side. Open your mind, withhold judgment for a bit. The part about the Abrahamic Accords that I'm most excited about, that I think everybody can play a role in, is just go and see the place. Get to understand the people you're going to visit. Get to understand their culture, their history, their values, what motivates them, what drives them. And like Malcolm said before, I guarantee you're going to find far more in common with a young Emirati and his visions and his aspirations as does a young Israeli. They're going to want the same things. They're going to want to look after their family. They're going to want a career. They're going to want to make a healthy living. They're going to want to live in a safe neighborhood. They're going to want the same things. But often we tend to our decisions or our analysis is judged or it's overwhelmed by politics or by not enough information. And so I think once we get past this pandemic and people are able to travel safely, I really want to see a lot of young Israelis visiting the UAE, and I want to see young Emiratis visiting Israel so they can actually get to know each other and understand each other and develop the kind of relationships that Malcolm and I have developed over the years. I remember hearing in a panel once that most Israelis grow up believing that all Arabs hate them. And I think the Abraham Accords at least made some progress in shattering that myth. What we see is a warm peace. We see people excited to visit. We see people excited to study. We see people excited to do research together and do business together. I think that is exactly what we need to capitalize on and keep the momentum going. The more there is a warm peace, the more there is understanding and respect, the better it is going to be for the entire region, not just the UAE and Israel.
You know, I don't think I shared with either one of you before today what the impetus for this was, but we had a program for our organization, Partners Cleveland, for our top leadership with Ari Lightstone, the former chief of staff of the American Embassy in Israel. And we asked him this same question, is what can we do as leaders in our community to help foster the Abraham Accords? And he gave us a whole list of things. He said, on your next trip to Israel, stop off in Abu Dhabi. He said, do a food drive for Sudan, because we often don't talk about Sudan, who's also normalized relationships with Israel. And he gave a number of suggestions. And one of the things he said was, invite the UAE ambassador to your next event to be the keynote speaker. So that was, we had to thank Mr. Lightstone for Rabbi Lightstone for giving us this idea. But I think it goes along with exactly what we're saying, that it's about a friendship, getting to know one another and realizing that we probably have a lot more in common than so to speak, we have apart. Along the lines of what the ambassador has both said here tonight and some of the videos that we've cut to, there's tremendous Islamophobia in the world, in America, in the Jewish community, and it, I believe, comes from focusing on one, the radicals always sort of lead the agenda. The radicals get most attention. The radicals get the press. The radicals are in the news and the movies and the books, etc. And as we said, it wasn't always like this. If you read Michael Orn's book on faith fantasy, I forget the name of the book, where he describes the Middle East in the previous century, the American people were enamored with the Middle East, and I think that's what we as the Jewish community have to stand up against. A lot of that Islamophobia. Realize that radical Islam is not everyone, that the United Arab Emirates, the ambassador, leading the way in trying to dispel that myth. I'll just share with you a personal story that back when I was a rabbi in Cincinnati, along these lines, and this is going back 15 years or so, we had a interfaith Shabbat dinner, an interfaith Sabbath meal at my house, and we had myself, my family, and some young Jewish leaders from our community, and we invited some young leaders from Cincinnati's Arab community, and it was just a very eye-opening experience for everyone at the table. Sit down to eat some challah and wine and kugel and whatever else we had, gefilte fish, and really just talk and talk about the Middle East, talk about these different things, how to them it's an occupation, to us it's Jerusalem, and etc., and really just talk about these things. And these are things that are such hot button topics when they're on the news, but when you're talking around a Shabbos table about it, it's the same topic. The positions are the same. The philosophies are the same, but the connections are much stronger. So I think, as both of you have really shown with the example of your lives and your friendship and encourage us to do, it's about that friendship. It's not only about Israelis visiting the UAE, us Americans, when we go to visit Israel, stop off in the UAE or make a trip to the UAE in and of itself. I mean, you can ask my wife that when I first heard about the Abraham Accords, the first thing out of my mouth is, we're going to Dubai, right? That was one thing that I'm very excited. I'm very much looking forward to visiting the UAE. So I think that the two of you have set the tone for all of us to continue to foster this relationship, to build this friendship so it should last for years, decades, and centuries to come. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts, any last words? We'll start with you first, Mr. Hoenlein.
Look, I think that this will be a much better year as we get control of COVID so that we can return our focus to what is really important. You outlined some of them, and certainly the ambassador did. The goals and objectives that we have to make up for the past years and the lost time, but to build for the future. The world is not standing still. We see the forces of evil advancing, and the forces of good have to come together and counter them and show young people who, I think, as you said, inherently want to do the right thing if they're educated and given the opportunity and the information. So I am optimistic, and I'm really hopeful that we will see really great things happening in the year ahead, and I'm committed to trying to make it. I'm looking forward to working with the ambassador and being able to get together and hug again and work on and really advancing in every aspect the goals of the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, my last message is just, let's look at each other as human beings and people. It's one of the lessons I've learned from COVID. Let's try to be less political. That doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but it does mean when we disagree as friends with respect, and we try to understand the other person's point of view. And I think the Abraham Accords is a perfect vehicle to try to do all of this through. Let's try to get to know each other a little bit better. Let's try to develop a strength, a respect and trust for each other, because that's ultimately how peace endures.
Ambassador, Mr. Hoenlein, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for your time tonight. This has been so inspiring for me. I know it's been inspiring for all of our listeners and viewers here tonight. Just to echo Mr. Hoenlein's words, I can't wait till we get to meet in person, and I just look forward to that day happening very soon. I wish you all a wonderful summer, and until we can meet in person, be well. For the past 7 years, Partners in Torah of Cleveland has touched the lives of tens of thousands of men, women, and children from all walks of Jewish life. Since March of last year, stay-at-home orders and quarantine requirements demanded virtual learning opportunities. Thanks to our advanced virtual learning platform at Partners Cleveland, we were able to help attendees in record numbers to connect with their Jewish heritage. During this crazy year, we even expanded our staff by welcoming Rabbi Jacoby to our growing family. We are anticipating, as soon as it is safe to do so, a new season of our popular monthly Shmord program. All this bears a tremendous cost, and fundraising is more challenging than ever before. To that end, we will be conducting a 33-hour fundraising campaign via pledge.com beginning Sunday, April 25th. This campaign is the needed lifeline to help continue serving you and our community members with innovative programming. But we can't do it alone. We are inviting you to partner with us by volunteering some of your valuable time to help us reach our campaign goal. As a token of our appreciation for your time and effort, for every $250 you raise, we're going to enter you into our campaign raffle with over $4,000 of amazing prizes. Additionally, by raising $1,500, you will receive an ATG smartwatch and fitness tracker. Pledge.com enables you to make your very own fundraising page, customized with your name, fundraising goal, and personal link. You can choose a fundraising goal, but you don't have to meet the goal. And if you do meet the goal, the platform will automatically adjust itself to a higher goal. So let's get started. Take a minute to click on that link that we included with this video. You will then be asked to choose a fundraising goal. Your chosen goal will be doubled through our cumulative match. So if your fundraising goal is $1,000, put in $2,000. There will be a number of marketing materials such as social media posts, graphics, a call script, promotional videos, and more provided to help pave the way for you. So be sure to include the best email to reach you at and let us know whether or not you use WhatsApp. You do not have to wait until the campaign date to start soliciting donations. Your campaign page will be in pre-campaign mode as of April 20th, 5 days prior to the campaign. Dear friends, we need your help and support more than ever in reaching this goal. We cannot wait to celebrate the success of this important campaign with you. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you.